Okay. Now, our next speaker, Martin Boyle, he's head of startup and corporate programs at Codebase, which is the UK largest technology incubator. He spent nearly 20 years working at Tesco in both food retail and financial services. Martin is an expert of operational change management and digital delivery in large corporations. At Codebase, Martin has designed and delivered the low tech, health tech and energy tech programs, which supports startups, business founders and corporate leaders to navigate the complexities of business transformation. So Marty, feel free to come here and we are happy to hear from you.
I'll stand back as well.
From here they are going to able, because you're very tall. So
So no slides from me, so thank you very much. Firstly, thank you very much for inviting me to speak. I will be your first speaker who has no legal background, so be kind when you ask your questions later on. I thought maybe a good starting point would be to talk about very quickly what Codebase is, what we do, how we interact with startups and corporates, and then how long do you want me to speak to, given we're a little bit behind?
10 minutes.
You've still got 10 minutes, okay, excellent. So just a quick word about Codebase. So Codebase is actually down the street, and feel free to call in and meet Barry McDonald and the team. There are Codebases in Edinburgh, which is where the company started. There's now one in Stirling. We have one in Aberdeen. Codebase is 8 years old, and it's a tech community. As I said, it's the largest tech community, definitely in the UK and possibly in Europe. The foundation seeds of it were two brothers who realized that there wasn't a tech community in Scotland, and actually technology companies prosper. If you look at the examples of, first of all, Silicon Valley, places like Paris, places like China, where you congregate technology companies together, they prosper, they grow, and they become anti-fragile. If you've read Mark Logan's report from 2 years ago, the anti-fragility that you get from having a tech community that's based together is great. So if you go bust, you can walk down the hall and you can get a job with another startup, and the system perpetuates. So Codebase is 8 years old, which is ancient in terms of what that community does. It's a technology community. It's mostly product startups. So not very many service companies. If you think about the way that technology is normally put together, it can be university spin-outs, it can be agencies that will build you something, or it can be product tech startups, and they're very different. And we focus mostly now on tech product startups. Interestingly, again, our buildings are 80% full. So we were 80% empty 2 years ago. We're now 80% full, which says that community is very, very important in tech circles. Importantly, for the next thing I'm going to talk about is that Codebase has a strategic partnership with Barclays, initially with Barclays Ventures, which is no longer part of Barclays, but now Barclays Corporate. And that's because Barclays, about 4 or 5 years ago, started what they now call their Eagle Lab network. And that was an incubator program which took redundant bank branch space across the UK and turned it into a co-working space that ultimately they hope to attract startups to. That was positive, and what we do with those companies is that we mentor their network and share our experience with them. Out of that developed the idea that, as well as mentoring the startups, we could take some of the learning that we knew existed in the startup community and apply it to corporations. So when I talk about corporations, I talk about businesses that have got tenure. So if you think about a startup is, very, very short-lived, anything between, a couple of months and up to 10 years. And an incumbent company, a corporation, would be anything, from more than that to hundreds of years in some cases, in particular for law firms. You've got hundreds of years old companies. And that's quite significant because of the culture and the attitude towards innovation and change is very different in a small company with 2 people than it is with a large company with, in my case, I worked for Tesco for 20 years, as you heard, with nearly 300,000 employees. And some of the risk and the governance processes that sit around them are very, very different, and that's all taken into consideration. So specifically on law tech, we started working with Barclays on a law tech program in 2019. And the reason for that is that there's quite a well-known essay written by a man called Mark Andreessen, who used to be a technologist and is now a venture capitalist, and it was called Software is Eating the World. And this was the proposition that if you weren't a software company 10 years ago, you would be in 10 years' time. And he specifically called out some industries, law being one of them, health being another, and energy being a third. And coincidentally, they're the programs that we run where technology hadn't yet taken bite, but he presumed that it would do, and that artificial intelligence would replace people. A lot of the processes that you saw in particular in law could be automated, and that he believed that investment in law tech was going to be significant, and it was going to be game-changing in terms of the way that law was administered. And it turns out that that is both right and wrong. So what we've seen over the course of our programs is that we try to bring together, with the assistance of Barclays Ventures, some of the UK's largest law firms and some of the most promising startups in law tech in the UK. And we try to educate them in the playbooks that software product companies knew worked in terms of building new products. So you've heard that fintech is huge in the UK, and you will very easily be able to bring to mind fintech products which have changed the way that banks are delivering their services. So you think of Mondo and Starling and Revolut and TransferWise. These have all changed the way that we interact with our own banks, and actually have changed the way that banks think about themselves. So if you think about a little segue to the past, if you think about the fact that if you did online banking 10 years ago, it was appalling. Truly awful. It was, first of all, online service which tried to replicate a branch interaction. It was probably built by an IT team in a bank who were more concerned about its integration with their existing systems and customer experience, and it was not very user-friendly. If you think about that in the terms of what you have in your pocket now on your phone, and the way that you interact with your bank, is probably the app that you use most on your phone, barring social media. And I can tell you from a Barclays experience that they take more money through their app in the first 3 months of the year than they take through their branch network in a year. So it's significant. So why bring that up is that the way that technology has changed, the fintech scene has changed the way that we deliver banking, was assumed to be the way that law tech would change the way that law was delivered. Now it turns out that that was quite difficult for them. And our law tech program tried to focus on where we could help law firms work with startups and startups to work with law firms. And that interaction is really difficult for both parties. So what you tend to find is that people who run law tech companies have come from the law, and they understand the bit that they used to do. They've identified a small problem, and they think that that is universally applicable because it would work in their firm and it should work in all. And actually turns out that the way that law is delivered doesn't lend itself particularly well to that. So I think that one of the things that we've noted over the past couple of years, in fact 3 years pre-pandemic, was that there was a bubble of investment for law tech. In 2019, there was a huge amount of money, the most famous of which was an investment by Andreessen and Horowitz into a company called Atrium, which was run and started up by Justin Kan. Justin Kan might mean nothing to you, but if you play online gaming, or you have children who do online gaming and use Twitch, Justin Kan was the founder of Twitch. He sold it to Amazon for $880 million. And he thought, in the same vein as we've just described, that law was ripe for disruption. He took a $100 million investment for his company, Atrium, and he gave $75 million of it back a year later. And the reason that he found it very difficult was that once he got to a certain point with automation and document management and all of the services that he presumed could be productized, actually what he found is that he needed to recruit more and more lawyers. So once you got beyond a certain point, it was very difficult for those processes to be administered by a computer or an algorithm or some sort of productized, some sort of product. And actually, he realized very quickly that that wasn't possible. Has anybody else, this is a personal opinion, I might add before I say this, has anybody heard of the company Seed Legals in the UK? So Seed Legals is a tech startup as well. It helps people to do early stage funding if you're a startup. It helps with document automation. It gets you through your pre-seed, seed, Series A rounds by filling in your details. Now, what's quite interesting, again, from a personal experience of that, and having spoken to people who've used it, is that the initial interactions with that process are excellent. But once you get into a complicated funding round where you've got multiple stakeholders and your cap table looks a little bit more complex, actually what they do is they hand you off to a lawyer. So I think our first speaker said that while there was this notion that AI was going to take over law, and perhaps, pitching forward it will, at the moment, that's not what we're seeing. And I think that's a huge difference between the bubble of investment that you saw in 2019 versus what you're seeing now, which is it's actually quite difficult for legal tech companies to get traction and to get funding, with some notable exceptions. I think the notable exceptions are quite important because, again, this is from people I'm meeting rather than a survey of the global market, is that integration with existing systems, I think we've already heard about, can be quite difficult. If you're building a system as a startup, what you tend to do is you build on free or nearly free software that does not integrate well with a legacy system in a law firm. So you have to think about what it is that you're building to. So one of the firms that we've met most recently, Definely, based in London, lawyer who saw that contract automation was going to be, contract drafting and automation in drafting was going to be an opportunity for him. He built it as a plug-in to Microsoft Office with backwards compatibility to very old versions of Microsoft Office, very important in law firms, and he got investment from Microsoft Ventures. So it's quite significant to us that there are opportunities, but you have to be very, very careful about how you position yourself. One of the critical and important differences between the way that startups build products and the way that incumbent companies, and this is true of energy and health companies that we work with as well, is the mindset in terms of building a product from a software startup perspective is all about iteration. And iteration is very poorly understood outside the world of startups. You know, having an idea which is nearly free and going out and user testing with people in the street is completely anathema to a law firm who would want to only launch something which was fully fledged and risk assessed. So it's quite difficult in the culture, from a cultural perspective, for law tech to be adopted. And one of the pieces that we were working on when we were running our law tech program was to help both the startups to understand that and the law companies to understand that. One of the things that we also noted is that it's much, much more straightforward, and this is borne out by some of the pivots in terms of sales that the law tech startups have made, is it's much, much more straightforward to sell your law tech product to an internal law department in a corporation than it is to sell it to a law firm. And one of the reasons for that is that heads of legal or directors of legal in, like say, Tesco Bank, where I used to work, or in an airline, are already being tasked with operational efficiency. And many of the law tech tools that are out on the market now are actually efficiency and operational savings drivers. So if you're already tasked with saving money or saving headcount, actually one of the opportunities for you is to turn to law tech companies. Also, you've got an IT team which are tasked with operational efficiency, so the integration is much more straightforward. So I think just thinking about the time, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the success stories that we had in our law tech program. It ran from 2019 until February 2020. What we were trying to do is work on the assumption that while small companies were not very good at selling, big companies weren't very good at buying, having a group of people who would come and talk to them about how they could kind of narrow the gap between the two of them. And what we found is that actually once you put these were law firms and tech companies in the same room, you build a community around about the notion that they can actually work together quite effectively, it started to work quite well. Minimum viable products and proofs of concept are a big deal when you work in the world of startups. What we found is that the 25 startups were able to work more effectively. They were able to raise more funding. So about £4.5 million worth of external funding came to the group of people that we had collectively over the year. 2 of those companies were acquired. They were acquired by law firms, again, significant. They started to deliver commercial partnerships and they started to deliver proofs of concept. So I suppose the arc across the sort of the last 10 minutes is that while there are notable opportunities for startups to work in law, they need to be very careful about how they think about their proposition. Integrating into law firms is very difficult for a whole bunch of reasons that you will know much better than I do. I've only seen it from an external perspective. And that the opportunities for efficiency saving legal operations are probably greater than they are for something which is truly unique in terms of a product which is going to change the law in the short term, but that's not to say that it will be the same over the next 10 or 15 years. And we're doing questions later, so I'm happy to take any questions. Is that all right? Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much,
for sure. All right.